How's it going, everyone? Bit of a small group tonight, but that's cool. Gonna how's can I get some thumbs up how everyone's going? Sweet. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll have some more people roll in as we get started. But yeah, welcome back to another week of the Resilience Growing Livestream. I'm Tobias from Farmwall, and yeah, today we have a very awesome guest, Luke, who you might have seen in the videos on Monday from Reground. So we're going to hear from him in a little bit. But yeah, first of all, I'm just going to do the welcome and the acknowledgement. So I'd just like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm streaming from today. And I would like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledging that I'm streaming from land that was never ceded. Sweet. All right, so ooh, that's a bit funny. The audio just went weird there for a second. I'm just going to run through the agenda quickly. So I'm just going to do a little check-in with Abby. She's going to talk to us about the well-being survey that we've been in touch with you about. Then we're going to hear from G, who's going to talk a little bit about feeding fish and about the water quality, just clearing up some issues that we've seen in the Facebook group some people have questions about. And then we'll pass it over to Luke. And we're looking forward to hearing from him all about waste management and his work with Reground. And then we're going to open it up at the end to a bit of discussion. And we have some questions for Luke as well. And I'm sure, and if you guys have questions for Luke or Farmwell at that point, that's when you can unmute yourself and speak into the group. It's a nice small group today, so we'll probably have some nice healthy discussion, which will be awesome. So, Abby, take it away.
Sure. Hey, everyone. So the wellbeing survey, I'm sure you've all seen it. And thank you to everyone who has filled it out so far. Tomorrow is the last day to enter, and you'll go into the draw to win a $600 prize from Bon, which is really cool. The survey is really important to us. So if you haven't done it, which probably all of you guys have, yeah, we'd really appreciate it. And it ends tomorrow. I can't remember if I said that or not, but it ends tomorrow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And the reason it's so important is we with being the pilot program and everything, all of that information and your experience is incredibly valuable to us doing this again successfully in the future, like letting us know where we've slipped up, where we've succeeded, so we can basically make this again, but 100 times better and help more people become resilience growers. So yeah. G, do you want to talk to us briefly about, if you have anything that you want to share and also just talk to us about feeding fish?
Hey, good evening, everyone. And welcome, Luke. It's great to see you in our weekly Zooms. So very excited about what we're about to hear about the amazing work from Reground. We're another week in. Everyone's received their fish, or almost everyone. There's a few people that are still about to receive them. And yeah, I just want to have a little bit of a chat about feeding our fish, because there's been a bit of confusion around how much to feed our fish, how many times a day, and what's good for them. And it's actually just a small pinch every day. And I know there's a few larger granules in the fish food. If you come across those, make sure that you crunch them down a bit before feeding them to the fish, so that they actually get eaten, because all the food that from now on drops to the bottom, that actually creates ammonia, which will slowly start to affect your fish health. So ammonia is one of those ones. If you don't get on top of it, then you won't see it straight away, but it's more of a medium term result. So a hungry fish is a happy fish. Like a fish is cold-blooded, so they don't need to eat as many times as we do to warm up their bodies. So even if we skip a few days from the moment if the water starts to go cloudy, or we're a bit concerned, immediately stop feeding for a couple of days. And from the moment you see your fish getting more energized and more and happier to see you again, then you can start feeding a pinch a day again. But even if you go on a holiday for a week, people often get worried about feeding the fish, but they'll be perfectly fine because their bodies can actually sustain themselves for 3 to 4 weeks very easily without being fed. So yeah, any other questions about the system and about the fish and the lights, we can come back to at the end of the program today. So yeah, happily pass it back on to you, Tobias, to introduce Luke.
Thank you, G. I know it's pretty easy to get a bit excited with feeding the fish. I've been finding that myself as well. But yeah, we just have to remember they're cold-blooded, so they're going to be fine. Yeah, just feed them a little bit. All right, so I'm going to introduce Luke now from Reground. So how many people have watched the video with Reground this week? Has anybody gotten around to watching it? Yeah, 6. So you guys will have seen Luke. We had a little introduction with him at Reground where he showed us around the Alphington facility. Thanks, Caroline, for saying you've watched it. I would recommend watching it. It's a great video. Cool chat talking about all the stuff that they're doing. But we're going to expand on that a bit tonight, and Luke's going to tell us a little bit more about the history of Reground, and also, we're going to open it up to a bit more of a discussion around some things, so around waste. So if you guys have any questions, now's a really good chance to ask someone, an expert in the field. So yeah, without further ado, maybe I'll pass it over to you, Luke, and get started.
Sounds good. Alrighty. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to chime in on tonight's part of the program. Before I kind of get going, just in my experience with Zoom, every now and then the presenter might kind of glitch and not actually realize, and you skip like 30 seconds of content. So if that happens, please send something through on the chat, or just unmute yourself and just say, hey, Luke, you've been frozen for a minute, or whatever it might be. And we can just go back and kind of sort everything out. Basically, over the next sort of 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to give you, as Tobias said, a bit of a rundown on Reground as an organisation, what it is we do, why we do it, and what our philosophies kind of are around waste. But although I'll be speaking a lot sort of through the lens of Reground, please know that this is very much applicable to the individual as well. At the end of the day, Reground was born out of 2 individuals, and now we are a team of only 6 people. So although I might be sort of putting the cap on everything as Reground, please know that all of these learnings, all these philosophies are really applicable to each of us as individuals. So I'll talk a bit about Reground, a bit about what we do, a bit about our philosophy and what and the service we provide. Then I'll go into a little bit about food waste and sort of more applicable learnings, things sort of more to do with your resilience kits. And then we'll sort of, I guess, open it up to a bit of Q&A, a bit of a discussion. For the next sort of 10, 15 minutes, I'll share my screen just to put up a few slides, just to make it sort of easier to follow along. But like I said, if anything sort of drastic comes up as I'm going, please just send through a little blurb in the chat. So I'll just share my screen now. All right, has everyone got, I just want to make sure everyone's got the Reground logo on their screen. Yeah, cool.
Yep, good.
And away I go. All right, so what is Reground? What do we do? What do we stand for? What's sort of our purpose? What's our philosophy? Well, basically, to sort of run it all back, about 5 years ago, we were founded by Nina Larson, our managing director, and shortly after that, Caitlin Reed joined the team as our commercial director. And really, Reground started with the 2 of them collecting coffee out of the back of Nina's car, just out of simple desire to divert waste from landfill. The coffee industry, although we all love it in Melbourne here, it really is, sorry, I'm just struggling with slides here. It really is highly detrimental. If coffee waste goes to landfill, creates methane gas. So essentially, we're a waste behaviour social enterprise working to educate and empower the public and local businesses to reduce their waste. We do this through our coffee, chaff, and soft plastics collection. Oh, there we go. As you can see here, our collection and our education are the two pillars of the business. So whilst we do collect coffee, chaff, soft plastics as our sort of immediate service, education and behaviour change services such as our workshops and waste audits and management plans are really integral to the future and the vision of Reground. Because ultimately the goal of the business, goal of the organisation is to reduce the volume of waste going to landfill due to the obvious environmental consequences of organic matter going to landfill, breaking down anaerobically and creating methane gas. And thankfully, tied to all of this, with the education and the collection combined, we can effectively reduce the waste management costs of businesses. And that's kind of where we tie in as a social enterprise, where we do, generate a revenue, but we also are passing on those savings to our clients so that ultimately, as a collective, we're diverting more and more waste from landfill. Our work and our philosophy is guided by the waste hierarchy, which you'll see here. And as you can see, to date, and historically, I would say, there's this perception that waste management has been reliant upon centralised recycling, waste-to-energy infrastructure, and landfills. It is our belief, and basically the belief of anyone working within sustainable waste management, that to transition towards a sustainable future, these solutions really need to be the absolute last resort and not the status quo. That's why on the right of screen, you'll see this sort of the future horizon, I guess you could call it, for waste behaviour, being most preferable is avoiding your waste accumulation to start with, sort of solving the problem before it's even an actual problem. And I really can't stress how critical it is that we emphasize this avoidance, because a lot of communication around, say, circular economy, it's all about recycling. But as I said, if you avoid the problem to start with, you don't need to recycle the problem. That's the reason why minimization is sort of the next preferred element of the waste hierarchy. Same with, and then followed by reusing, and then at least hyperlocally recycling, sort of steering away from the out of sight, out of mind market that we've built over the years. Now, as I said, a key part of Reground is our collection business. I like to sort of think of it as us walking the talk. We talk a lot about, through our behaviour change programs, our education series and what have you, but we're also out there actually collecting the waste, actually diverting it from landfill. You might have even seen our van tearing around the metro area. Each time it does, there's probably a ton of coffee in there. There's 16 bins, works out to more or less 1,000 kilos. And we work with small to medium-sized enterprises, cafes, offices, roasteries, all around the Melbourne metro area, effectively by dropping off the Reground branded bin you see there. The cafes, the offices, they fill the bin up with their coffee. We swing by, swap it over, simple as, and we take it on to our end users. You can see Russell there on the right. Our end users are basically local growers, community or urban farmers, or the Melbourne Zoo. And they use the coffee as an organic fertiliser at about a 20% ratio. Any more than that, it's getting a bit acidic for the soil and the microorganisms. But in doing so, in using the coffee in your compost system, not only does it work as an organic fertiliser with the nitrogen within, but you avoid the production of methane gas. And as we know, depending on what you read, methane gas is between 30 and 70%, 30 and 80%, I believe it is, times more potent to the atmosphere than CO2. So there's obvious benefits there. And through this local action, as I said, this was a team that started off with Nina by herself. Then quickly after, Nina and Caitlin, for a number of years, just the two of them. Now we've exploded to 6 people. Through over the last 5 years, through the coffee that's been diverted from landfill, we've avoided the production of over 1 million kilograms of methane gas. And I really personally think that's really testament to what local grassroots action can achieve, because 1 million kilograms of methane gas is now not in the atmosphere, has been prevented from ever going into the atmosphere. And that's a real benefit that no matter what, if God forbid Reground ceases to exist tomorrow, that's still 1 million kilograms that's been avoided. There's sort of no going back from that, and that's real benefits for society. Paired alongside our coffee and chaff collections is our soft plastics collections. We collect soft plastics. It's kind of organically grown over the last couple of years because, as I'm sure a few of you know, maybe all of you know, but your standard MRFs can't actually process the soft plastics, basically because they're so light and fluffy they get caught in the machinery. So they need to go to niche recyclers who are finding niche solutions for them. We provide our clients with GrainPro bags, which are the 2 green bags you can see either side of the bin there. They're a currently unavoidable waste product of the coffee industry. So we pass these bags onto our clients. They fill them up, as you can see on the right there. That one's full of a whole bunch of clear plastic. And we work really in a very hands-on manner to ensure no contaminants go into the soft plastics into the GrainPro bags. Key contaminants being sort of takeaway containers, the hard plastic, milk bottles and what have you, food residue, oils, aluminium lined packaging, or any sort of composite materials, which unfortunately a lot of packaging is nowadays. It's not so simple to get one sort of straight soft plastic bag. You're often getting multiple polymers, multiple materials such as cardboard, aluminium foil, all wrapped in one. And now, although that might sort of extend the life and durability of the packaging, that can't be recycled in and of itself. It needs to be separated, as I'm sure you probably know. But the process is, once we collect the bags, the GrainPro bags from our clients, we head on back to the depot, as you might have seen in the video. We bale up the plastics into basically cubic meter blocks, and we then transfer them to our local recycling partners. The clear plastics we send to APR, who create a building membrane, which is used basically to waterproof concrete slabs and what have you, protect the reinforcement from moisture, which at this point in time, under the current Australian and basically the cutting edge construction methodologies, you need a waterproof steel. So this product at this point in time is a complete and utter requirement. So at least now it's being produced without the input of virgin materials. Similarly, our coloured plastics, they get processed. We ship them out to Close the Loop in Somerton. They create tonoplas, which is that sort of charcoaly coloured material you can see being held in the top right by the yellow gloves. What tonoplas is an additive that binds together aggregate in road base, in asphalt. And again, this is serving a purpose that's currently needed in how our infrastructure is set up. Victoria is exploding with its infrastructure upgrades, and a big part of that's the roads. So at least this way, there's a lot of roads being laid, particularly in the Hume area, with recycled plastics. So we've got the collection arm of Reground. We collect the coffee, we collect the chaff, we collect the soft plastics. But if we go back to the waste hierarchy, that sort of hyper-local recycling is only sort of the 4th priority. So what about avoidance? What about minimization? effectively, these really are the priorities of waste hierarchy, and sort of looking through the lens of sustainable development, this is where we need to progress to as individuals and as a society. So what is it that Reground does to implement avoidance and minimisation strategies? And this is where really the learnings are very applicable to your own home. To avoid or to minimise your waste production, you're looking at a behavioural shift rather than, say, an infrastructure upgrade or a technological intervention that you would see for, say, recycling. So we're narrowing in on behaviour here. We know a behavioural shift is required to avoid waste generation and to minimise our waste generation. But before we even sort of think about what the shift and what the intervention might be, what the shift in our behaviour might be, we really fundamentally need to understand exactly what the problem is for each of us as individuals. It might be you as the individual, you as a part of a household, you as a part of a workplace. What is the waste issue for you specifically? Because it really does change person to person, household to household, business to business. It sounds incredibly obvious to say knowing the problem before coming up with a solution, but so often it really is overlooked. So often we really do just want to jump to the solution so badly that we don't holistically understand the underlying problem. And so this is where a waste audit comes in. Essentially an audit there's nothing fancy there. It really is just rummaging through your bins, trying to work out what the main sources, main waste streams are, what your main contaminants are, what your non-recyclables are, what your misrecyclables might have been. And the data and the learnings that come from a waste audit really are irreplaceable in their objectivity, because at the end of the day, I think we're all sort of prone to remembering the best parts of our behavior, not the worst parts. And so when you're going through a bin and you're in your recycling bin and you've thrown out a half-eaten apple, it's a real reminder that, even yourself can slip up. I was just out at East Brunswick Village, the new apartment block out that way, yesterday, basically dumpster diving, I guess you could say. And it's amazing what you see. You see half a perfectly fine pumpkin in the bin. You see loaves of bread. We found one full bag of shopping, which may have been a complete mistake, but several unopened packs of pasta sauce and what have you. So going through your own bin in a waste audit really is the best way to come up with to work out your behavior and where you are going wrong, and then come up with the plan of attack forward. So once you know your main sources of waste, maybe it's food waste for you, maybe it's soft plastics, maybe it's liquid paperboard, maybe it's aluminium packaging, who knows? Only then can you really work out your action plan. With regards to your resilience growing kits, my understanding is that these 4 products shown here were the main waste items. Your styrofoam boxes, your soft plastics, which you would have just received with your fish. And then I guess more so in the future, I'm thinking your hemp sheets, your dead microgreens, and also just the cardboard boxes that you sort of accumulate over time. From what I understand, you guys are already killing it with your styrofoam boxes. These are, again, one of those sort of niche items that need niche recycling solutions. So what's better than hyperlocally recycling? Well, it's reusing it, which I understand you already are in your wicking bed. So hats off to you all for that. The soft plastics that you're going to accumulate over time through the resilience growing program, but also just sort of in your daily life. The solution for them right now is where you can, the obvious solutions are, use a tote bag, not a plastic bag when you go to the shops. But beyond that, ultimately, it's just got to try and recycle it hyperlocally. Depending on where you live, there might be solutions with your local council. So I would highly recommend getting in touch with them. For example, we partner with Yarra City Council and we collect soft plastics there each week. And these soft plastics are just dropped off by local residents throughout the week. We sort through them, send them on to our recycling partners, and away you go. But there are, of course, other programs such as Red Cycle when you walk into a Woolies or a Coles. And, you know, these are still great solutions. It's still recycling locally. Your hemp sheets, your dead microgreens, cut them up, get them into small pieces and compost them. If, like many of us, you're living in an apartment and, you know, having a compost bin is maybe not ideal, first of all, I'd recommend checking out organisations such as the Compost Revolution. They do have solutions for apartment balconies, but if you want to go completely, you know, away from having a box full of decomposing organic matter, I can completely sympathise with you there. But then just have a look around for a local compost hub. For example, at Alphington, we're running a resource recovery initiative on the back of a Pick My Project compost depot. So there's solutions in Alphington. There are similar solutions in Thornbury and West Preston, and also just at sort of your local community gardens. They often have a composting system, which they're more often than not, they're more than happy to accept your food waste. Similarly, your cardboard boxes that you accumulate, cut them up into small bits and chuck them in your compost. They'll add some carbon to the system, or reuse them. Unfortunately, we don't really have time to go into too much more, or really any granular details on what else you can do at home. But I just really like to reiterate a few basic points to you, sort of moving away from, you know, Reground as an organisation, just talking more broadly about our own individual waste management. The goal really is, first and foremost, to avoid waste accumulation, to minimise our production, reuse the products that we do collate, and then hyper-locally recycle those which we can't reuse. Despite how, you know, gross they might sound, I really stress waste audits are something that you can very easily do at home. They really are the best tool to figure out what your unique waste management problem is. And trust me, you will be surprised by what you find, especially if you're living in a share house like me. Hooly dooly. But if you're a little unsure about what a... sorry, I just saw a few... So I was just reading the comments then, never mind. If you're a little unsure about what a waste audit would entail, what the process itself entails, what I would recommend, and please excuse me for the sort of shameless plug here, but tune into one of the sessions that Reground are running with Melbourne Knowledge Week at the moment. These are completely free, so no cost to you. I want to stress that. I'm not trying to, you know, sell you anything. This certainly not at this time of the night. But what we're doing over 3 weeks, we started it this week. So the first session's in the bag, but it is online on the Melbourne Knowledge Week Facebook page. But essentially over 3 sessions, we're running through live waste audits. Step by step, we're doing an audit of our own bins at our homes in real time with the audience who are doing the same thing. They've got their bins out with us, and we're working through the process together, filling out our data capturing sheets together. And over the 45 minutes, we cover the key problems and solutions that often arise in a waste audit. And then we have a discussion about what we can each do in our homes to action solutions to these problems. The benefit of these is that it really gives you a guided and interactive introduction to sustainable waste management. And as I said, completely free of charge. Our next session is Tuesday, the 30th of June at 4:30. So please, by all means, tune in and join Caitlin, Nina and I. The final session's the 7th of July at 4:30 as well. And I can send through links to those if you'd like. But yeah, I mean, I'm personally learning a lot of Caitlin and Nina in these sessions, so I really, really do recommend them. So that's pretty much it for my spiel. I hope you've gained a few insights. Oh, thanks, Abby. I hope you've gained a few insights into how local solutions and local businesses and local actors really can play a key role in waste management. They really can have global impacts. The whole cliche of think local, act global, I think that's it. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away from my part of this session, it's that change really does start with you as the individual, with you as a homeowner perhaps, or perhaps you in the office, in the workplace. Understanding our own behaviours through tools like the waste audit. This is really key to becoming more sustainably minded in your daily life. As I said, there's a few links. I'll just jump back a slide. A few links here. I'm happy to send them through via Toby and Abby. But for now, that's pretty much everything I had to say. Why don't I'll stop sharing and then we can open the floor to questions and discussions and what have you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Luke. It's great, very insightful talk. I realized we didn't actually sort of say what your title was at Reground and what you do day to day. So should we just enlighten everyone as to
yeah, where do I fit in the picture? So I'm operations manager for the team. I work with Nina and Caitlin each day to I oversee the daily happenings of the business, manage our clients on the collection arm and our partnerships with our local recyclers. But increasingly, I give Nina and Caitlin a chop out with the behaviour change and education programs as well. So, our team is Nina, Caitlin, myself, and then we've got a couple of our drivers. We've got Kyle and Jay, and then social media and PR by the lovely Rennie, and that's Reground. The six of us kind of going strong.
That's great. It's kind of it ties into a bit of a question that I had for you, Luke, which is sort of related to the role that you're playing within society. It's a really sort of, it's kind of like one of those jobs, like someone's got to do it kind of thing. It kind of, one thing that I think of is like, is the role that Reground is playing, is that a role that like our local governments should be playing and yet they're not for some reason? And so it's kind of come to the point where organizations like Reground and individuals who are just so fed up with the state of things that they've just taken it upon themselves to do something that perhaps the government or more state managed entities should be doing. What's your perspective on that?
I agree with you 100%. I think in an ideal world and in some other countries, particularly some of the Scandinavian countries, it seems that the government is more proactive in this space. Does sort of lead those sort of initiatives. But, point crying over spit is pretty subpar. A lot of our waste, our avoidable waste, is in an ideal world, it wouldn't have to come to small hands. I think there is some sort of silver lining, kind of innovative benefit to it. I mean, at the end of the day, the SME sector is where a lot of our innovation's driven. So yeah, I mean, it is that tough one. I really am increasingly getting frustrated with the slow moving reality of government. The other week I was chatting to who will hopefully be a future recycling partner of ours, and they work with soft plastics in agriculture at the moment, but the fellow has applied for a grant to set up basically a network of soft plastics recycling facilities for post-consumer soft plastics, which are the hardest to recycle. Still doable, absolutely, and still needed, absolutely. But he's set in a whole bunch of series of grant applications to each state and territory government. And his sort of optimistic view is that he'd be able to accept plastics in 2 years from now. So we're, 3 years removed from the China sword fiasco, and us not being able to send our plastics overseas. And yet it's going to take another 2 years to get any sort of viable network of recycling solutions. I just think, to me, thankfully I shaved my head recently because I'll be pulling my hair out.
Yeah, it's I think especially for us working, like people existing in the startup world, the pace at which things move in institutions like government can be very frustrating, given how much the need for change is. And I was kind of wondering if maybe you might have a bit of something to share around like what barriers do you think are actually stopping government or local councils and stuff from implementing the kind of sustainable waste management that we really need?
I mean, that's a really tricky.
If you know, I mean, it's a bit of a big question, so it's all good.
But I mean, I think there's a lot of things at play there. Like, first and foremost, it's easy in some ways, being someone who's currently working in sustainable waste management, to beat my chest and harp on about what's wrong with, governance and policy interventions around my niche area. But the reality is there's so much that the government does need to address. So in some ways, I think it's almost a little unfair. But in saying all that, like, I don't know, I think it might be a sort of difference of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
I rant about certainly going deeper into politics, but the point of a 4-year, the priority, if you get in office, the priority over the first few years is sort of consolidating yourself. The priority of the last couple of years is ensuring you're re-elected. At what point are you sort of looking 10, 20, 50 years down the line? So much time. We need, I don't know what the mechanism would be, but we need some sort of safety net where we can sort of project to 2050, for example, and what does an recycling infrastructure look like at that point in time, and then start working towards that rather than retrofitting the infrastructure we've got at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess in that instance, that's kind of one benefit I see of companies like Reground existing, because it's like that's your core mission and you're in it for the long haul, and you kind of have the nimble agility and the capacity to create that initiative and move past the barriers. But yeah, it kind of does seem strange to me that's like, there's a lot of areas where, like, personally, and also I feel like maybe other people might share the sentiment, where like stripping of publicly funded initiatives that benefit society result in a sort of vacuum that ordinary people have to then step up and fulfill the role of. And it's kind of a blessing and a curse, but it's kind of, it would be better if that problem never.
Yeah, but I mean, there are.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you just broke up a little bit there, Tobes.
Oh yeah.
Sorry if I cut you off, but what I was going to say is that it's always a double-edged sword, because yes, all right, you can make an argument that with a proactive government, you wouldn't need initiatives like a Reground, for example. But the benefit of a Reground is the community that it builds. And I think that kind of sense of collective action is really powerful. So, there are sort of benefits and cons, I guess, to any situation.
All right. I've been nudged to stop talking about politics, so I'm going to sort of ask a question from Andrea in the chat. So she has a chat for you. What is more important, investing in research with how to deal with existing plastic waste, or investing in research to develop decompostable waste? What's the priority in your opinion?
in my opinion, it'd be investing in how to deal with existing waste and then investing in emphasizing avoidance. Whilst compostable waste, plastic waste packaging is great in many ways, the reality is most of the packaging out there needs to go to a commercial composter. So there's freight involved there. Plus commercial composters, they need to, so what's your compost bin? It's sort of like, it's this micro system where it heats up your food decomposition process. A commercial composter does this, tenfold by adding in energy inputs to heat the food waste. So you're taking your food waste and your compostable packaging and you're taking it to a commercial facility which needs energy input to heat it, to process it, and it needs the freightage to get it there. And I really don't think that's a way forward, personally. I really think working out what we can do with the plastic waste we've got, and then emphasizing the first few points of the waste hierarchy is more important in my eyes. But also, just bringing up the point of research, communicating research more effectively is something that needs investment. Like science communications, sort of, cornerstone problem of science at the moment is effectively getting findings out to the public in ways that can be digested and implemented in business plans or just behavioural shifts. So I think there's a lot involved in that question, but for me, it would be emphasising what do we do with the waste we've already got? How do we avoid creating more waste, basically?
Awesome. I don't know if you saw that, Luke, but she said thank you in the chat.
I'm getting distracted by the faces, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Would anyone else? Has anyone? Would anyone like to weigh in the question, unmute themselves, and add anything to the discussion, or ask Luke a question? Yes, May.
I noticed you've got you had a tiny little bit about maybe it was incineration or waste to energy. Yeah. Do you know much about that, or what are your thoughts on that? Because I know, like, we have heard about some really cool stuff about food being turned into new things, but also I guess the incineration side of things. I've heard if it's done at such a high temperature, it can be okay for the environment, but then also the other side of the argument that it's still not any good.
I mean, this is full disclosure. That's a point that we have a fair amount of there's sort of shades of disagreement between Caitlin, Nina, and I on it. And I think broadly,
this is in regards to the food to energy plant that's going in Alphington. Is that the one that you're referring to?
Or just in general?
Or just in general. Sorry, my bad.
I think my opinion on it is that firstly, there's the input that you need to heat the waste to the temperature to produce energy. I think it's kind of, in a sense, counterintuitive. You're inputting energy to export energy, get an energy output. But there's also, again, like there needs to, in my opinion, there needs to be a perspective shift with our consumption habits. Like even if we have the most efficient waste to energy in place, we're still over-consuming and overproducing waste. Like that is the problem. Working out down the line what to do with that waste, that shouldn't be the sort of hallmark solution in my point of view. And that's why we work in behavior less so than, we work in behavior as much as we do recycling. The waste to energy debate, it's a really tricky one because, it's put it next to landfill, which is where most of our waste is going now, absolutely makes sense. but put it next to the more sort of systemic shift of minimizing and avoiding waste, it's terrible. So it's kind of it depends what lens you look at it through. I think it's got a role to play in the future for sure, but sort of similar, as it was shown in the waste hierarchy, it should have a minor role, and it should be the sort of, the safety net before landfill, rather than sending food waste there straight away. The best result for your food waste, if it's completely unavoidable food waste, is a compost system that requires, no more energy than you turning it, ideally. It's certainly a tricky one, the waste to energy debate.
Yeah. Thanks.
No worries. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Does anyone want to contribute to that? Anything to add? I might add.
You can add.
I just wanted to sort of follow on from that a little bit, Luke, because you talk a lot about reducing reducing production of waste at the source, which I 100% agree with. How do you? It's on like the relationship there, though, seems to be between the individual consumer and industry that is producing a lot of the soft plastics and a lot of the food waste, and seemingly out of our hands in that sense. Like we can't, like a lot of that waste is being produced by industries that we don't have a stake in or don't have a role in, potentially. Maybe I'm misguided there, but my question is how do we get industries that produce a lot of the waste in the first place to change?
Well, that's where personally I think the government needs to take more responsibility, is to push that product stewardship. So right now the model of basically waste management at our sort of societal level is this shared responsibility between the producers. It might be, the fashion industry or whoever's producing said waste item, and the consumers. It's a shared responsibility that the waste product is sustainably disposed of. I really think it should be the producers who takes responsibility for the disposal, recycling, or perhaps avoidance of that waste product. And in a lot of other countries, particularly European countries, there is that push on that onus on product stewardship. And that, to me, is something that's really missing in much of the conversation. But I think you'd be surprised with, what a lot of names signed on a ballot paper might be, the power that a lot of names have. So there has been some push by individuals pushed back onto on said manufacturers to change their packaging, for example. Like that has happened. So maybe again it falls on the public to push the manufacturers into product stewardship, into reducing their, nowadays you order something from, say, Amazon or whatever, and if it's electronics, it's wrapped in LDPE, wrapped in bubble wrap, wrapped in a plastic envelope, and you've got 3 layers of packaging for this one, set of headphones or whatever you've bought. Like, it's ridiculous. That's probably in a cardboard box. So I think there really it should be a push from government, but, doesn't seem, now we're going down politics again, but it doesn't seem to be happening. So maybe it is a public push for that product stewardship. But I think that you're right. Like, sometimes you can't avoid that waste as the individual. So
yeah, I think that the term I've heard to describe it is kind of the kicking of the can down the road, the sort of passing the buck on responsibility. And yeah, I'm really interested in the future of how that responsibility will be taken up by the people who. Yeah, but I do have another question that maybe you could answer. You talked a lot about Melbourne in your presentation, and we do have a lot of people in the cohort who don't live in Melbourne, who live around the country, and might be interested to hear. I don't know if you know of any similar organisations or businesses like Reground that are operating around Australia.
Unfortunately, not. To put it very to the point. There is, for anyone in New South Wales, there's plastic police. They work in soft plastics, slightly on collection, more so in education and specifically on soft plastics. But in terms of the sort of slightly more holistic organic waste, plastic waste, education, behaviour change, there really isn't much out there at the moment. And that's why Reground, you know, every day we're getting emails about expansion and what have you. And a really important part, something we hold very dear to us, is sort of qualitative versus quantitative expansion. You know, we want to be making the right impact where we are working, rather than making, you know, a slightly off center impact all over the place. But yeah, I mean, hopefully the Reground model shows success, and the growth of social entrepreneurship in Australia will sort of we'll keep on heading down that path, and there'll be more organisations that pop up. But at this point in time, there really aren't too many players in the market that we're operating in, which, yeah, it's
maybe a call to action potentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can all start at home. And I think your story kind of highlights that, like how we can it all just starts with a lot of the actions that need to be taken can start with an individual who just wants to make a difference, and how it can snowball. And,
yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, take Nina, for example. Like the real roots story of Reground is Nina was working at Padre Coffee, just those not in Melbourne, just a cafe in Melbourne, noticed how much coffee grounds was being produced week in, week out, and she knew where those grounds were going. They're going to landfill. So she just started, instead of putting the knock box into the bin, she'd put it into a bin that she bought and put that bin in her car, and then drop that bin off at the zoo. And then away we go. 5 years later, there's a behaviour change social enterprise, you know, growing. So it really, when we say like it starts with you as the individual, you don't even know where that might go. It might be that you just want to be sustainable in your household, and that's amazing. But it might actually lead to a career change.
Perhaps G could weigh in on that. Awesome.
Going on that, I just want to share in Farmel's case that about 4 years ago, when I quit my job at a time in the beer industry, I went on a mission to live completely zero waste for a couple of months, and like to actually turn my bin into a void where there was nothing. And I went a bit extreme on that path, like to really eliminate every bit of waste that I could. And to the point where I was negotiating with people at the markets not to use plastic gloves when they were picking up my piece of salmon or anything from the window. But I think what I want to add to that is that if we want to live waste free, and if we want to reduce our waste, it's a large effort. It was almost taking me was almost becoming a full-time job to find products and to design to make my own products to be able to eliminate that specific piece of packaging that I was trying to avoid. But it's like the change is not only needed in our households, because we're dealing with a problem that somebody else is creating and it's being pushed down the road. And that's the issue with waste. It's always another person or another company pushing it down to another person, and another company pushing it down to another person, another company, until there's no person and no company left, and then the victim will be the ocean or the environment. And it's up to all of us to inspire the companies and speaking back the other way, down the value chain, where the waste is being created, and raising the standards and raising the bars of what we want to see in the world. Because if you look at it at the reality, like we're dealing with problems that are created by the companies we purchase from, and those companies, they're dealing with the waste that they're being provided by the companies they purchase from, and so on and so on and so on. So if we go upstream rather than downstream, then eventually we might actually end up with a bin that stays empty without us having to sacrifice all our time and inventiveness and creativity to be able to deal with that. So yeah, I think the more and more companies that can get inspired through the help of the government and the council to design products and services that don't require that much plastic and waste, or be creative with new inventive ways that are not soft plastics, the better. So I think we've all got a voice to speak about what we want as consumers, and that we don't want to be responsible for somebody else's choices up the stream.
Slow clap. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, G. And yeah, I think it kind of mirrors a lot of the sentiments of what Luke and others have talked about tonight. I'm aware we're getting pretty close to 8 o'clock, and we haven't really addressed any questions regarding farm related stuff and resilience growing. So if anyone has any questions they'd like to know, stuff about their kit or about their fish or anything, I'd love to answer them. Has anybody got any questions, or is everyone's all good? Oh yeah, Paul.
Hey,
Hey,
can you hear me?
how's it going?
Good. Thanks. So the little air bubbler thing that came in the kit originally,
yeah,
I've plugged that. I plugged that into my the tube that goes into the fish tank next to the water pump, and now I see that that's also to be put into the hydroponics setup. So is it either or both, or where should it go?
It can work in multiple kind of setups. So if you're just doing, you can put both the water pump and the air pump onto your fish tank, like you've set it, like you have it now, so that there's air flowing through the water pump, and that just assists with the filtration. However, if you just use the water pump for your fish tank, it still filters just fine. It's just perhaps not as effective. So, but it's still like perfectly fine for the fish and things like that. And then that air pump can be used for your hydroponics. So then you can run that through with the air line into your hydroponics and get the air stone pumping. So you have the water pump attached to the undergravel filter in your aquaponics setup, and then you have the air pump attached to your hydroponics and the air stone. Yeah.
So you don't split it; it just goes into one or the other.
I wouldn't split it, just because it probably wouldn't produce enough air bubbles. But maybe G could weigh in on that. You might be able to split it.
Because mine's got 2 outputs, I think.
Oh, true. Yeah. G,
Yeah.
do you want to contribute? Oh, yeah, sweet.
Yeah, if you got 2 outputs, you can put one into the hydroponics and one into your fish tank.
Okay.
But otherwise, you can just the fish tank can perfectly run on the water pump, so you don't need the air pump. It was an option or. So if you get the water pump running on your fish tank, you're good, and you can use all the aeration for your hydroponic setup.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right.
Awesome. Alrighty. Thanks everyone for hanging out tonight with that chat. Hope everyone learned something new. I certainly enjoyed chatting with Luke. It's waste isn't a particularly sexy topic, unfortunately, but it's super necessary one to talk about, and it'll certainly make a sexier planet if we can get it sorted. So cheers, hats off to Luke for doing that work, and tune in on Saturday if you like for the Saturday live stream. And yeah, I think that's good. That's pretty much us for tonight. So thanks everyone. Catch you later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.